More has happened in the span of this show than happens in the first half of One Piece.
More happened in the span of this show than happened in the entirety of Grimgar Fantasy and Ash.
Yeah. Hello and welcome to Add It to the List, the show where we binge watch a season of an anime and then talk about whether or not it should go on your watch list. My name is Forrest, and with me, as always, is...
I'm Jack.
Beware of spoilers for the first season of this week's anime, which is Fooly Cooly. Jack, what did you know about Fooly Cooly before this?
So I had, in a prior life, before becoming an upstanding citizen, I had watched it when I was like 16 in less than sober contexts. And rewatching it now, it's very pleasant to know that it makes about as much sense as it did back then. But since then, I talked about it a lot with a coworker of mine who, like, it's his favorite anime. He has a tattoo of the main character in, like, the final episode, just, like, smack dab on his, like, bicep, like prime tattoo real estate. So yeah, I passingly familiar, infinitely more familiar with the concept than, like, the actual content. How about you?
I would be in a similar boat. I knew about it because a guy who lived on the same floor as me in the dorms in university, it was like his favorite series of all time. And I remember I like came into his dorm room one time and like a bunch of other people were watching it. I thought it was like the last 2 episodes that I saw, but I didn't remember anything from those episodes, especially when I watched them this time. So I have no idea what part of the series it was. I just remember having zero clue what was going on. It was very confusing to me. I think it's not nearly as confusing as I thought it would be. I was expecting it to just be like bonkers, like not even making sense. But you could argue that there are aspects of it that don't make sense. But we'll get to that. For a brief summary of Fooly Cooly, for those of you that haven't seen it, basically it's about a boy named Naota, and he lives in some town in Japan. I don't know if they ever named the town.
No, it's your stereotypical riverside sleepy town.
But they talk about at the very beginning how there's this building, is what they call it, that belongs to Medical Mechanica. And it's just like this giant iron, like a steam iron that just sits at the top of the hill in the town. And basically, it's just about Naota running into this woman named Haruko, who uses a bass guitar as a weapon, and she like runs into him with her moped really early on, and then everything just kind of goes crazy.
Yeah, it's worth noting at this point, actually, that I watched the dub because if I consume something in one way, and this is sort of like with the Persona episode, except with far less emotional valiance. Like, I had an idea of what these characters sounded like, and the idea of hearing them differently, I just couldn't deal with. It's not like Persona, where it's like, I care about my sweet, precious children. It was just like oh, this is weird.
Yeah, so this is the second one where I watched the sub and Jack watched the dub.
Yeah. Interestingly, they call that that Medical Mechanica building iron, they call it a factory. Like, they specifically call it a factory in the dub, and I wasn't sure if that was a difference.
I think they probably do, but honestly, like, so much happens in these 6 episodes that it's just kind of really hard to keep track of what happened in each episode. Yeah. I was reading about kind of the history of the series, and apparently the director, like, when he was coming up with the concept for the series, he wanted to make something that just like was like no other anime, and I guess he was very influenced by commercials, and like he wanted to create something that was so short and compact and just so dense with information that it just like basically just blew your mind apart.
Well, by God, if he didn't hit that design note.
Yeah, he definitely did.
Oh my Lord.
So should we just like talk about the first episode?
So normally we would do like a little bit of a talky talk with like light spoilers. This is the type of show where, because it's so short and because so much happens that's interconnected but also very separate, like spoilers are hard for this show because what is and isn't a spoiler is iffy, right? And so I think realistically, we can start off with just like characters and like visuals and like general themes that we enjoyed, and then we can call spoilers and do plot discussion if we want, or we can just like leave the plot as we talk about the characters.
Yeah, I think that should be fine. I mean, should we just talk about Naota first then? Kind of his situation?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, basically the first episode picks up with him talking to this girl named Mamimi, who
deserves better.
Yeah, it just kind of like right off the bat, she is like fondling all over him. She's kind of like hugging him. Like, I felt like she was kind of just like kissing him, but it was very, very like.
She's like nibbling his earlobe.
Yeah.
Like,
very romantic things that you wouldn't just do to some random person.
And when he says right off the bat, it's literally the first scene. Like, so interestingly, how the way that episodes are structured, there is no intro to this show.
Yeah.
It's, you have a cold open and you're opened. Like, that's the show. Like, that's where the episodes start. There is no like transition in that way. So yeah, like literally the first thing you see is like in this like sleepy, like 5-6 o'clock late afternoon riverside town, there are these two kids that are goofing around underneath this underpass, and they're talking, and she's obviously a little bit dreamier. She's like practicing a baseball swing for reasons that aren't apparent at this time, and he's trying to do his homework, and then she just starts draping herself on him and starts nibbling his ears. And when he goes, "Why are you doing this?" she says, "Because if I don't, I'm afraid I'll overflow." It's weird. It makes no sense in context, especially at this point. It makes a lot of sense in like the capital A art sense of it, but like this opening scene is just hard. What? The song is gorgeous. Before we actually talk about it, all of the music in this show is back-to-back banger. I love it.
That would be the band called The Pillows. They're a Japanese rock band. I do not really know much about them, except that their music is good. And that's really all you need to know about them. But then Mamimi is doing that, and like they kind of like fall over. Is it in this moment that you learn about his brother? Because I don't remember if she mentions his brother in this moment at all.
Not in this moment. We learn about his brother over the course of episode 1.
And apparently he like went to the U.S. to play baseball.
Yeah, so Mamimi was Naota's older brother's girlfriend. But we also find out in this episode that since he's been living in America, he has an American girlfriend. And so, like, again, right off the bat, Mamimi deserves better. Because she's obviously being cheated on, and there's, like, the heavy implication that she knows about it. But, like, what's she gonna do about it, right? And it's a weird sub-thread that, like, just doesn't get touched on enough. So, like, yeah, right off the bat, she's just in a weird position. And, you know, she's obviously projecting onto Naota, right? Over the course of the, like, series, you pick up on the idea that Naota's He puts up this like, oh, this is annoying type image of himself, but he's here for it, right? He kind of likes the attention in a way that becomes a source of conflict later. When we're introduced to Nauta, he's complaining about how nothing ever happens in this town.
And that's kind of the big theme of the show, I think, because that's honestly what kind of the show leaves off on, that nothing ever really happens. But then kind of going right past, because it's like right after that moment that they're kind of like walking and they're just like going back to Naota's, I'm assuming, or they're just heading home for the night, and then the new character Haruko just like runs into Naota with her scooter, her Vespa, and then things just kind of get comical for a second because Mamimi is just like, okay, this just happened, and like Naoto just goes flying, and ultimately he's fine, but then doesn't Haruko also then just smack him over the head with her base?
Yes. There's also like a mouth-to-mouth CPR joke here. So she hits him with the moped, and then she gets off the moped and goes, oh, he's dead. And to be fair, oh, he's dead. And then she goes to like mouth-to-mouth revive him, but it's definitely just a smooch. And then he gets up and he's like, hey, what is all of this? And then she just brandishes this bass guitar with like this engine in it, and she like pulls this ripcord and just takes a bonk at him. Yeah, and that's really what she's going to end up doing a lot in this series, is being a force of chaos. There are two ways of looking at Fooly Cooly, realistically. It's in the capital A art sense, and then at face value. At face value, this show is nonsense. I think we're far enough into it that it won't mess with the metrics if I go, this show is fucking weird.
I mean, that's one way of putting it.
But it's more succinct than anything in this show. But there is a lot of imagery there, and there is a lot that you can pull from it if you're looking to pull something. If you're just looking to be taken along a ride, oh my lord, you're going places.
I mean, that's how I feel even now. I'm like, we need to talk about this. And I'm like, God, I don't even remember what happened in the second episode because it's all just one big blur.
He hit the design dock of getting you with commercials because it's succinct. You get what you get, and then you think back about it, and you only remember the bits that caught your attention.
I mean, after Haruko kind of just pops up out of nowhere, I think Naota just like takes her back to his dad's shop, or she ends up there before him. I literally can't remember because I think she's just there all of a sudden.
She just absolutely goes to town with him, or like on him with the guitar, and then it cuts to him like having this like, big old cube-shaped bump.
At the moment, we don't know exactly why that is, because he like is capable of like pushing it back in. Yeah. And then he like bandages his forehead, and that's kind of a recurring thing, is he always has a bandage on his head, and then something crazy ends up happening.
I feel like they're not even at home yet, because I feel like the thing happened. Oh no, the thing happens that night. It's weird, man. There's no there's no reason for the events to happen in the order that they do, and so trying to place them in a coherent order is weird to do when you're not looking at it. I do think she just sort of is there at dinner, and he's like, ah!
Yeah, he's like, who the hell are you? Where'd you come from?
I think we cut to him in bed, in his bedroom with a bandage. His dad calls him for dinner, and she's there. We then cut into like animated manga style, where it pans through like manga panels that they're voice acting.
And this whole segment was literally just like, it was supposed to be comedic.
It was chaos.
But it is just so chaotic because you can't even follow, especially when you're watching the sub. I could hardly even follow what the subtitles were saying half the time. So
I'm
like,
happy to report that in the dub, it's a coherent conversation, but it's real dumb.
yeah, in the sub, it is just absolute chaos. Everyone is screaming at the top of their lungs. And we learned that Haruko basically has become a housekeeper for Naota's dad. She just kind of is there from this point on. Like, she's just living with them, essentially. And she's living in the same bedroom as Naota. The other weird thing about the Mamimi situation is we didn't even talk about how she's in high school.
So Naota's a middle schooler. Early middle school. It might be late middle. Naoto's comfortably a middle schooler. Mamimi is some sort of high schooler, and we find out that Haruko is at least 19. And it all sort of matters insofar as this show is not a coming-of-age story, except for when it is a coming-of-age story. Which is to say, it isn't focused on being a coming-of-age story. It's showing you how these characters deal with change. And that change is in the form of manic pixie dream girl Haruko. Emphasis on the manic.
Yeah.
She crazy. And a lot of the crazy is like very obviously like comedy segments, but they were comedy segments from the year 2000. And they don't like age terribly insofar as they're, you know, racist jokes or like homophobic jokes, but they're just like, this is disruptive.
Yeah.
And granted, a lot of that style of humor exists today, but it's like, and you see it all the goddamn time in anime still, like where that, like those disruptive cut-ins or like somebody just like absolutely tanking a scene by just creating chaos.
Yeah. I mean, before we started recording, kind of the way that I described the show is I feel like the show deals with emotions and not necessarily puberty, but like it's kind of like an emotional story about, you know, a kid in middle school just trying to figure out his life amidst all of these crazy situations. And you could also say that a lot of it might just be symbolism, but it's also all wrapped up in this crazy sci-fi fantasy story that is there and like isn't that difficult to follow, but once you kind of like wrap your head around it as the story goes on, you kind of get a sense for like how Naoto is supposed to like grow and change throughout this. Not that he necessarily really changes that much, but he kind of has these two female characters that are kind of fondling over him, like kind of always there in his life. And what's a middle school boy supposed to do in that situation? You know, like that's kind of how I feel like this whole show is framed, because there is a lot of sexualization at play. And when you think about the fact that this kid is in middle school, you're like, wow, there's these two older girls that are just kind of obsessed with him. And Haruko is obsessed with him for a completely different reason than Mamimi. But yeah, it just gets kind of weird.
Like it's made evident by the end of the series that Haruko's definitely doing some weird sci-fi manipulation of Naota, but Mamimi's just straight up projecting. Like real, like that's what she's doing.
And her arc is kind of about her getting over that in a way, I feel like.
Yeah, it's upsetting that most of it happens off screen though. Like
yeah.
Her arc in particular. Most characters don't change that much, which is to say that most characters are supporting cast. Like the main characters are Naota, Mamimi, Haruko, and that's pretty much it. And Haruko is the agent of change. Mamimi's a side character, and Naota's like the only main character. So his arc, it's weird because since it is so short and each episode kind of stands on its own, we don't really get a lot of like in between episode changes. But, you know, very, very obviously the Naota at the start of the series is not the Naota at the end of the series. So in that regard, we watch him change, but it's more that we watch the events that force him into changing, but we don't see him change until like pretty much the last half of the last episode. We kind of definitely started talking about the plot when we said we were going to talk about Nauta, and then we definitely kind of started talking about characters in general.
I know.
But honestly, I feel like that's very indicative of how the show is structured.
Yeah.
The long and the short of episode 1 is Haruko shows up, bonks him with her guitar. They go do some scenes that fill in the exposition at his place. He's on a bridge with Mamimi at night, just doing some sad boy stuff. Haruko has this like bracelet, locket, chain thing that starts acting up, and she's like, ooh, okay. And then that bump that Naota had as he like becomes more conflicted, and in episode 1 I think it's like his feelings towards Mamimi, not as it relates like romantically, but just like what is my life right now type of feeling. As he becomes more conflicted, the bump turns into like this giant flesh pillar, and then out of that giant flesh pillar comes a robot that's being strangled by another robot hand.
Yeah. That's kind of when the show really just is like, oh, okay, this is what the show is.
And if you're off by this point, you're not coming back. This is not the show for you. Like, what? The episode ends with Hanako just jonking the robot with her guitar and turning it into a good blue robot rather than the angry red robot that it was. Absolutely banging outro. Like I said, there's no intro, so there's no intro song, but the outro slaps. The outro visuals are weird. They're very experimental. Like, you get like this setup of Haruko rides a Vespa. And so you get some anime Vespa stuff, and then it cuts to like a real POV of riding a Vespa.
Well, the Vespa's doesn't even have a rider. Like, the implication is that the Vespa is like sentient, because she even whistles for it later on, and it just like comes to her. But yeah, it's just like riding around in a real town in Japan, just like doing whatever to the beat of the music. And it's funny because Amy started listening to this song.
Hey, Forrest, who's Amy?
Oh, she's my partner. Anyway, she started listening to this song like right before we watched this show, and I was like, that's a really good song. So I was already kind of familiar with the song, and it was even better to hear it in context.
It slaps. All of the music in this show slaps. So the reference I'm going to make is true for a lot of the aesthetic appeal of the show in general. So this is a fair enough time to jump to the aesthetics, unless you wanted to like really hop into episode 2. The music sounds very much like something you would hear from the movie version of Scott Pilgrim, as opposed to what you hear in the comic book version. It very much, a lot of this music sounds like it could have been done by the Sex Bombs. Some of it becomes like more like rocky than like, like punkier or like grungier than like some of the other Sex Bomb stuff. But like musically, visually, conceptually, if you like the works of Brian Lee O'Malley, you're gonna like this show. It's similarly existential. It's similarly stylized, not insofar as it has a similar visual style, but it has a true to itself image that you're either going to really like or you're going to really hate. And it's over the top epitome of like video game, comic book, anime culture, as far as it just doesn't hold any punches. And it's also similarly nerdy, right? Like, I don't know if it's that way in the sub, but like the dub, that like initial like chaos, like dinner conversation that we were talking about, they make references to Gundam during that time.
Oh, yeah.
Like Gundam Wing. And so it's like, hang on.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of just other anime references trickled throughout.
There's a Star Trek reference. I don't know if it's in the subtitle, but there's a bit where Hanako goes to bonk a different robot later on, and I do not know why she sets it up. Or not Hanako, Haruko. Haruko goes to bonk a robot later on, and she says something about a sigh, and then she makes a joke about 7 of 9, and it's such a weirdly phrased joke that I had to stop and think about it. It's weird, but she makes a cyborg, emphasis on the Borg joke, and name drops 7 of 9. And so it's just one of those...
Yeah, that honestly might have only been in the dub, because I was reading that the dub director said that just rewriting the script for English was like one of the hardest things he ever had to do.
That makes sense.
So I'm assuming there's probably references that like they probably added in the dub because they knew that it wouldn't land as well for Western audiences. Yeah, should we talk about Haruko? I mean, I feel like
Haruko...
we could use the second episode to begin
to talk about Haruko in detail until we call spoilers off.
I mean, I feel like we can do that whenever.
Okay, spoilers off.
Yeah.
So Haruko is just this random woman on a Vespa when we were introduced to her. Turns out she's a intergalactic space pirate villain who contracts out to the government, but I
mean, it doesn't really matter. She's an alien, and she tells Naoto that, and I had no other reason than to not believe it. Or, no, I had no reason not to believe it. Because later down the line, she just gets up and goes off into space. And then when I was watching it, I was like, oh yeah, she's an alien. But, I mean, like, she's just the epitome of insanity.
Yep.
And her whole goal ultimately, it seems, it was to just keep pushing Naota to like keep producing these robots, because there's a very brief point where they touch on how Naota, after she like hit him in the head, he just like has like a weird portal now inside of his head.
So, oh god, my chair. So what? And maybe they don't say it as explicitly in the sub, but in the dub, we learn from Amaro, who's this like big, fake, bushy eyebrow government guy, that she specifically she exploits the dissonance between the left and right brains to create this like wormhole from which she pulls things from other parts of the galaxy.
Okay, that sounds right. I think I remember that kind of being the explanation.
Yeah, but she can't do it from just anybody's head, and so Naota's just like a really good head for it, I guess. And I think part of the implication is because he already is so conflicted / so already suppressing as much as he is, that it's just that much easier. And that's kind of what, I mean, not kind of, but that is the sci-fi reason why she's messing with him that I was talking about earlier. Like, she's messing with him to use him to create that dissonance, to like pull these robots out to do what a thing that she wants to do. And the thing that she wants to do is the medical machina, is that medical machina? Medical whatever, the big iron in the middle of town.
Medical Mechanica. That's what it is.
Medical Mechanica. They are like this we find out in like the last episode, they are like this intergalactic force that is trying to iron out the wrinkles on each world, because the wrinkles are where our thoughts live. They talk about how wrinkles are where, like, you know, the surface area of a brain sending electrical, like, they don't go into it, but they briefly touch on that in an earlier episode. So like Medical Mechanica are bad guys, but what they've done is they've trapped this interdimensional, or this like intergalactic space pirate that Haruko is trying to get access to. She is trying to eat him to absorb his power, is the implication. And I think stated as much.
Wait, she's trying to eat the Pirate King guy?
Yes. The first time that they talk about it, Amaro says that she's doing it because she loves him. And she's trying to free him. But in the actual final confrontation, she talks about how she's doing it to absorb his power. And she gets really angry because, spoiler alerts, Naota absorbs his power for literally just the duration of the fight.
Yeah.
And she's like, well, only one of us can do it, and it's gonna be me. And that's why she's like going at him. But that's also why she's pulling the robots out, because somewhere in all of those robots is the key that gets her into the prison where he is. All of this is established in the last 2 episodes.
And you definitely picked up on that a lot better than I did. Because I did not, I caught some of that when I was watching it, but God, did I not catch the whole, part about her pulling the robots out specifically to get to this one.
Yeah, so that is what I think the implication is, because they heavily basically confirm that she is messing with him on purpose, and the result of her messing with him is these robots popping out, because all of these robots are creations of Medical Mechanica, and the last robot was the one that had the key to the weird hand prison.
Wow. I did not catch most of that when I was watching this show. If that, for any context, is an example of how just insane this show is.
Yeah, and you just watch it up to this point, too. So, you watched 4 or 5 episodes of this just going, what?
More has happened in the span of this show than happens in the first half of One Piece.
More happened in the span of this show than happened in the entirety of Grimgar of Fantasy and Ash.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, but episode 2.
Yeah.
It's just another day. We open up on Mamimi talking about how she saw a god the other day down by the river.
Which was the first robot that came out of Naoto's head, by the way.
Yes. Naoto has some more horns in this episode. Haru crashes into somebody else. I forget who. We get a few terribly unnecessary upskirts of Mamimi, which is where I'm going to stop and just, this show is not horny. Implicitly or explicitly, but there are bits that are unnecessary. We see up Mamimi's skirt a bunch. Naoto is taking a shower randomly, and we see him take his shower from behind. Naoko's classmate, another middle schooler, is staying at his house for an episode that does not matter. And for reasons unknown is talking whilst in the bath to his dad. The reason why she's talking to his dad is his dad used to be an investigative journalist, and he broke a story about some scandal involving her very important political figure father. And so he's apologizing to her. And for what it's worth, he is not being a pervert about it. He's not in the same scene as her. He's talking to her through the bathroom window, but he's not looking through. He's just talking, and the sound's coming in and she's responding to him. But we, the audience, see her in the bath.
Yeah.
And it's not played to be sexy, but it's also not necessary.
I mean, this is the same studio that did Evangelion, so
But Evangelion had the feeling that somebody in studio was getting off to
I mean, yeah. But I mean, that's the difference, in my opinion, is watching this show, none of the nudity or, what you could call the sexual aspects of it they're just not like other anime to me. Yes, they're unnecessary at points. Especially those bath scenes are kind of unnecessary. But none of the characters are explicitly sexualized in their designs. I think it's kind of a more mature show in that sense. I don't know how to put this other than I just feel like it's not in bad taste.
Like, it's not sexualized underwear shots, but there are underwear shots.
Yeah.
Which is, like, the existence of it is not excusable by saying that it is not for the purpose of being sexualized, because it is ultimately unnecessary. On a scale of bad to worse, it keeps it from being worse. but like, I like your point that like it is like that was the point that I was making as well. It could have been worse because it does not feel like it is being utilized for like sexual purposes, but it is awkward and unnecessary. Special shout outs to a running gag about people. Again, the fucking middle schooler. There's a couple of bits where people are fighting and like their hands catch on people's underwear, or in the case of the middle schooler, her gym clothes, athletic shorts. And the person keeps moving, but the person who is fighting them all of a sudden has their undergarments in their hand. And to the show's credit, we don't see anybody without their underwear, but there is like that big quotation marks comedy moment of, oh God. And then like, they just like push them off screen. And then all of a sudden the person's wearing them again the next time we see them. And like, I would say your mileage may vary, but if you find that type of stuff funny, you're stupid.
I mean, those scenes, that scene in particular was very short-lived. Yeah, we kind of just like skipped over episode 2, but I mean, episode 2 deals with Mamimi more, so I feel like we can talk about episode 2 when we start talking about Mamimi.
Mamimi is a very interesting... I mean, we can just do that now, because I do like Mamimi quite a bit. Mamimi deserves better, damn it. She also, like, she's a very interesting visual representation of disassociation. Because there are bits where she's hardcore disassociating. They're drawn in a much more serious context. This show has a very... I would say very weird, but it's a very purposeful choice to, like... Within the same scene, the animation can vary wildly. You get, like, key moments of, like, very serious, very, like, well-drawn bits that then transition as people move in, like, the comedy/chaos that you could argue, like, the chaos in particular is intentional to, like, emphasize the disruption. As those chaos/comedy moments happen, like, things get smeary, characters get drawn more like cartoony, their proportions shift, like, but never in a way that's like, oh wow, they really messed up this animation. It's like, this was a deliberate choice. But with Mamimi, you get these very beautifully constructed shots of her disassociating while she's smoking, and it's very powerful. Her cigarettes have words on them though, which, what a weird branding choice. It's never knows best is just written in like what looks like somebody just Sharpied it on the of her cigs. And it's like, girl, if you go on this, don't know. Get that away from the bit that you're inhaling. Stop it. Episode 2 is just like a little bit of how she met Naota's older brother. Not a lot terribly important happens here because it just sort of contextualizes her story and really just lets you show, like, it goes to show how she's kind of stuck where she's at, which then like contextualizes her change later on. It's heavily implied. It's basically confirmed, but it's never confirmed that a recent spread of arsons going on in town recently is definitely Mamimi.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they specifically say that she burnt down the school that she used to go to with Naota's brother.
Ago.
Well, yeah.
Recent ones are probably her. But
I mean, she seems like kind of a delinquent, but the whole point of her character, I think, is she's involved with Naota because of his brother, but her whole conflict is kind of centered around Haruko just like blowing, just slamming into Naota's life, just like being there. You definitely get a sense that she's a little jealous of Haruko because like Haruko is sleeping at Naota's place. Like it's never explicitly stated, but a lot of it is just shown in her emotions, I think, and like the way that she reacts. She really doesn't like Haruko, she gets saved at the end of this second episode by Naota because we learn that he can like pilot the first robot that came out of his head. Pretty much every episode is kind of just build up to one big crazy epic fight. That's kind of like the general structure of every episode. And this one, I think, is meant to allow her to kind of come to terms with what she's done. And she even has a line early on about how even though she burnt down that school that she hated, like it still stands there. But then by the end of this episode, it's just completely gone. So it kind of like wipes the slate clean. And this also kind of makes her fall for Naota even more in a weird way. It definitely deals with just interesting relationship.
Yeah. I get the feeling the way that the show presents their relationship that again, she is projecting her like whatever emotional value or like ability to be a productive person that she established with her relationship with Naota's older brother, she is projecting onto Naota. And so as Haruko shows up, takes up more of his time, is intentionally trying to make him more interested in her, all of a sudden Mamimi doesn't have that presence, that person, and therefore that external validation that was sort of grounding her, that she was sort of using as a coping mechanism to stop her from disassociating, right? Like that's what I pick up from like most of their interactions, which, that's, she isn't jealous of Haruko because she loves Naota. She's resentful of the change in her coping mechanism, right? And like that's how Haruko really changes her life, in my opinion. Like that's how I read that, is like she has found something that works, maybe not well, but she's getting by, and that's being destroyed as the show goes on.
I mean, that makes a lot of sense.
So this robot pops up. I forget. It pops up out of one of their heads to like demonstrate one of their dissonances between themselves.
I think this one pops out of Naota's head again.
And it's not going down to Haruko's guitar like the last one was. So the first robot, Forrest said Naoto pilots, which isn't inaccurate. But what happens is its stomach turns into this ephemeral monster with 1,000 eyes and eats Naota. And then it turns into this railgun with like brain hemispheres out the back to like stabilize it. And it just boom, 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 shoots the hell out of this thing. And it's it's visually insane, and it's gorgeous, and it's amazing. But then randomly, to end the transformation, the robot literally shits him out. He comes out brown and like in like the soft serve ice cream cone pile, and someone comments about how something smells like.
Yeah, Mamimi does. I mean, that. Yeah, I said he pilots it, but like, yeah, he basically just gets eaten by it. And there's even a representation of him like going through some weird whirlpool. Just very odd imagery. But I mean, that the whole show is just full of insane imagery. And like that's kind of the thing about digesting it, is just like so much of it is happening at once. And it's absolutely stunning animation. Like, it's honestly probably one of the best just pieces of animation I've ever seen, stylistically, artistically, dynamically. Like, there's just so much dynamic stuff going on that if you are going to watch it, it's just like, that in and of itself is like enough reason to watch it, in my opinion.
Do we want to do episode 3 or?
Yeah, because, I mean, I think episode 3, even though we've briefly touched on Eri, I think episode 3 deals with her, right?
Yeah, episode 3 is her episode.
And Eri is like a side quest, or side quest. She
You
is.
get not, and you don't get any good loot from it though. So you're doing it just for the XP, but the main quest kind of puts you at the level you need to be anyway. So really, it's pointless.
I mean, that genuinely feels like this episode. I love her character design, honestly. Like, I don't know, the art style for the characters in this show is really good, but the third episode pretty much deals with her, like we mentioned earlier, her like family trouble, and then she ends up staying the night over at Naota's.
This is where that bath thing that I popped off about happened.
They're also like both part of a play at school, which we never really like see any part of until like the very end of the episode. But that's kind of the main conflict. Is I can't tell if Eri has a thing for Naota or not. It's kind of vague because she kind of learns about how Haruko is like staying at their place. She also like gets a sense for just how weird the relationship is there for Naota. During this whole episode too, Naota has like cat ears.
Yeah, so
Because that's kind of the horns in this episode. Like, that's the thing that's coming out of his head. And basically, there's some stuff that happens at the school. But, I mean, yeah, this episode just delves into Eri as a character. And she's not, like, a majorly important character. But she is kind of like an outside view into what's going on with Naota.
there's kind of a very nice moment. So when she is initially starting to spend the night, there's a very good moment that kind of grounds these characters in middle school. Because there's a moment where she's like changed into a pair of his old pajamas and she's just like in his room, and they get traditionally middle school awkward about being a boy and a girl alone in a room together. And like the show represents that pretty well. And it does a good job of like them drawing very clear lines of like, no, that's not what this is. And like the characters like Ari's like, no, that's not what this is. And again, I think part of why like she gets weird about Haruko is kind of similar to Mamimi, but by to no means the same extent. Haruko is stopping her from using Naota in a way that she is trying to like use him to avoid her issues, right? Because the whole reason why the school play's happening, the reason why it's important is because it's the first thing that her mom and dad are going to see together since her dad started having an affair with his secretary.
I completely missed that.
Yeah. the affair is what Naota's dad like did the tell all about. Is there a band called USSR? Because in this episode, Eri has a USSR sweatshirt that's just like red with the letters USSR.
I mean, it could be a reference to the Beatles because they have that song Back in the USSR.
That's fair, and this feels like that type of show where that would be what that was, but I was just wondering if that was like a big thing. That was completely an aside. In this episode, for whatever reason, through some contrived sequencing, Haruko manages to hit Eri with her Vespa in much the same way that she hit Naota in the first episode. So the monster in this episode actually sprouts out of Eri's head. It's this weird tick monster, and this is the most awkward. This is a teenage, like this isn't even a teenager. Since it sprouts out of her head, she's still attached to it. And so she's like fighting in her gym uniform, which is a Japanese gym uniform. So it's like just really just like
Shirt and an underwear.
Yeah. And she's like kicking, and yeah, it's weird. There's some Tom and Jerry ass music going on in this one. Like the whole final fight music soundtrack. I'm like, this is an episode of Tom and Jerry. What is happening here? The monster has to shit itself after eating curry.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that because like earlier in the episode, Haruko made curry for Naoto's family, and it was just like absurdly spicy. And that scene was actually really funny because they were all just trying to talk while eating and just like dying eating this And like even Naota's grandpa just like fell face first into his curry, and I was like, this man's just gonna die. And then she like packed a lunch for Naota, and then it just so happened to fly into the monster's mouth.
Yeah.
But I was gonna say that I completely missed what happened, because didn't the cat ears that Naota have on his head just like transfer over to Eri?
So again, it's another one of those. The monsters are being pulled from the portal that's created by the dissonance in between the left and the right brain. So it comes from character conflict. So Naota, for this episode, has ears. And he basically throws a little tantrum in front of the class and, like, outs a secret of Ares. And in that moment, the ears hop from his head to hers.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, because she kind of freaked out a little bit. And since it definitely seems like these robots / creatures pop out when you have intense emotions.
It's partially intense emotions, and it's partially just, like, not dealing with the conflict of them.
Yeah. And then episode 3 basically ends with her, like, standing on the stage, even though they just had this crazy wild battle that, like, destroyed half the school.
Time has passed.
Yeah, I mean, it's very vague, and it doesn't even matter, because, like, the whole show, there is so many, like, leaps in logic. Things will happen, and then everything just kind of goes back to normal.
Episode 4 is a banger. Episode 4 is, I think, the only one I would watch in a vacuum. Going back to watch the show, I think I would just watch episode 4. I might watch episode 6 just for the final fight visuals, but even then, episode 4 gets weird.
4 is the baseball episode.
Yeah! Except unlike in Angel Beats, it's contextual. They open up playing baseball against some other teams. Haruko is playing for a different team and just absolutely smacking the shit out of them. There's this weird horny back scratch scene where Naota's dad is scratching Haruko's back with his beard, and like it's sexual, but this is like the first time that like something's like explicitly supposed to be like this is weird. And then they eat eggs in a really horny way. It's they like Lady in the Tramp share like over easy eggs. At this point, we don't know what's going on, but it's a hard pivot from the relationship that's been established with these characters from the first 3 episodes.
I feel like Haruko is kind of... I mean, Haruko is just pure insanity, but she definitely just messes with Naota by doing these weird things with his dad.
Yeah, like this one in particular, like we find out by the end of the episode that this is a constructed attempt.
But also Naota's dad is also just kind of bonkers.
Naota's dad is very inconsistent.
Like the adults in this show will just like, they're just kind of there and they like don't care what the hell is going on really. Naota literally just could be off doing whatever the hell he wants, and his dad just is like, yeah, it's fine.
Yeah, what's up, dude? So Naota's dad used to be an investigative journalist, but for now he runs a bakery with Naota's grandpa. We get the weird horny eggs. Naota goes to his room. Watching Forrest laugh at that. Naota goes to his room and sulks. And they don't like explicitly state it, but it is very much like this is us as the audience figuring out that like, yeah, he has a crush on this weird older woman. And yeah, what heterosexual middle school boy would not have a crush on this weird 19-year-old who's living in his room and is conventionally attractive? But like, this is our first depiction as like an audience of going like, oh, okay. He's up in his room, and then for whatever reason, he ends up going down to the vending machine outside of their building, where they meet I put in my notes down as Weird Vespa Man. Amaro, he's the dude with the eyebrows. Almost everything that we hard confirm know about the plot in the lore comes from Amaro. He's the guy who tells us about the exploitation between the left and the right brain dissonant. Like every piece of lore that we had, for context, up to this point,
he's probably my favorite character, honestly, thinking about it. He's just really funny. And every time he's in the scene, someone's like, what is with his eyebrows?
'Cause they're big. They look like seaweed
I also
sticks that are just
honestly
slapped
really
on his
love
face.
his like I don't know, assistant or like whatever she is. She's super funny.
Honestly, I feel like this is where things get real. So I feel like
Well,
this
should we
would be
finish talking about episode 4?
I feel like the rest of episode 4 just like
Yeah, we
I
can
feel
just
like
start the end of the series, the second half of the series.
honestly like
So much happens, man.
so much happens and so little of it makes sense unless you're like digging.
Anyway, Jack, would you add this to your list?
I'm a disgusting creature, Forrest. I honestly hadn't thought about this. I thought that by talking about it, I would know my answer. Yes, I think it's worth watching, if only for the fact that it is kind of a touchstone. It's not like the same touchstone level as like, the tried and true, like your Naruto's, your Dragon Ball Z's, but this is an influential anime in its way. And if you're really like getting into like weeaboo culture, like it becomes more and more prominent. Also, I do think it does things very well. I like a lot of love very obviously went into the animation, and it's very unique. And for as much as I don't like the like cartoonier / chibier elements of it, but that's just because I don't like them really in general, like as a visual style, the serious keyframe equivalent moments are so powerful. Like there's one in this episode coming up that's like, oh, it's very good. It's visually interesting. It's gorgeous at times. The music's a banger. The plot is dumb. The story is very good. I think I would, but if you're not in the mood for absurdism, it's whatever.
Yeah, if you're not ready to have your head just like turned inside out by a series.
Forrest, would you add it to your list?
Yeah, I definitely think I would. As I said before, like the animation in and of itself, I think is reason enough to watch and experience this show. I don't think there was a single moment when I was watching it where something happened and I didn't like verbally like have a reaction. Like there were so many times where I was just sitting there and I was just like, what? Wow. Like over and over again. And I'm kind of glad I watched it now rather than like earlier in my life, because I think I'm just at a point in my maturity and like just the way that I can critically think about things. I think had I watched this when I was like in college, like when I first saw a couple episodes, I was just in over my head. Like I didn't really, at that point, I hadn't even really started watching anime. Yeah, just I'm glad I watched it now. And honestly, I love all the character designs. I did laugh a lot also. Like it definitely draws a fine line between like being serious and being comedic, but it's also just so dense. So it's definitely something that I think I'll return to because I want to rewatch it, honestly. Like even now, just talking about it, I'm like, I feel like I can't talk about this. I need to like, I mean, I have been talking about it because we have to, but I feel like so much just went over my head that I would need to like give it a second watch. Anyway, yes, I would add to my list.
Okie dokie. So episode 4 starts with baseball, gets weird horny, then Vespa Boy happens. Naota gets his second hickey from Mamimi of the series. Like he gets one after that opening scene, and then he gets one here. So after all of the weird horny, Naota's just not in a good way. Like he's mopey, he's confused, he's angry, he's resentful, and he's denying it all.
Well, and after the Mamimi thing, didn't he just like not really talk to her there for a while?
Yeah.
Like she was kind of off doing her own thing.
By this point, he's like stopped hanging out with Mamimi because he's obsessed with Haruko. It's not depicted as being obsessed with her, but like starting from here in like the last couple episodes, it's a slow burn of like realizing that like, yeah, that's what's happened. Like we do get moments throughout the past couple episodes where it's like, oh, he's hanging out with her less, what's going on there, but it's not like something that we're focusing on, right? he goes and he hangs out with Mamimi for like the first time in forever, and she gives him a hickey. And then as he's getting back to the store slash his house, he runs into Haruko outside of it. And they have like a little bit of a confrontation where she's like Bond villain talking to him. And he's like, I don't care. You're just a stupid girl, blah, 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 blah. And then in a very well constructed, visually gorgeous moment, we watch her. We can't see her head because she's partially obscured by this advertisement banner. She's holding something, and then it cuts to Naota. It cuts back to her. She's holding the decapitated head of Naota's dad. And when she finishes her sentence, she drops it. It cuts to the head. It cuts back to Naota. Then it cuts back to Haruko, and Haruko is now holding Naota's head. And then we hard smash to a different like scene. It's so jarring. It's so frantic. It's so good. Oh, I love it. That shit. We get another weird, horny dad interaction, which is to say what we cut to is Naota basically peering through the cracks of his dad's bedroom door. And it's not, they don't use the fuck word, but it's much more like there's no room for interpretation. They are boinking. And by they, I mean Haruko and Naota's dad.
Wait, was him finding his like
sorry.
dehydrated dad in this episode?
Yes, but
Okay.
we get that, and then we get like a bunch of like other frantic imagery, and then we see Naota having visions of killing his dad with a baseball bat. We then see his dad talk to him with a hickey and like apologize, and then my note says montage dash the fuck, and it's like cuts between like Naota's like just acting violently and like his dad, and it's really interesting. And then we cut to this like grayscale image of like an angry Naota and like the singular red iris. And it's very good. And then we hard cut to what is structured like an interrogation with Naota and Amuro. And they do in the dub a nice little callback, because Naota smacks the vending machine when he's like frustrated earlier with his baseball bat. And that's when he first runs into Amuro. And Amuro goes, you could have just hit that with a piece of bread. This is a bakery, right? And so after what looks to be like did Naota do something violent, we cut to what looks to be an interrogation where Naota's being told, you could have just hit him with a piece of bread. And so as the audience at this point, you're like, what?
Yeah, I mean, that whole scene was just very crazy, because as all this was going on, I was like, wait, did he actually just kill his dad?
Yeah.
It was so, like, this show is so good at just being like, oh, here's another curveball. You thought you knew what was going on.
We get a little bit more backstory from Amuro. By backstory, I mean things that are necessary for understanding how this world works and character motivations. We cut back to the house where Naota's there, and turns out so now Naota did smash the TV, but what's more important is there's this robot version of his dad with a power cord going into its ass. That's like dead on the floor, basically. And Naota is confused, rightfully so. Yeah. And then he like opens up this cupboard, and his dad is there as like this like a mummified corpse with like roaches crawling all over it. A roach flies at him, and as it like fills the camera, it turns into a cat face. And then we cut to Naota rehydrating his dad.
He's just like pouring water over him. It's just so like things don't make sense, and like on purpose. Like there is just like not really a logic to this world, and it's fun because like things will happen, and then they will resolve in a way that you just like did not expect in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, and Dad fills us in on what happened a couple days ago. Haruko asked him if she could use his head, and horny Dad was like, yep. Turns out she can't do with him what she does with Naota. So she then like pivoted it into like being weirder with him. By being weirder with him, I mean into a different way of messing with Naota. This is where we get like a cutback again to that interrogation, quote unquote, with Amuro. And this is where he says that she creates an interdimensional rift between the left and right brains. There's a big old bomb crashing to Earth throughout the course of this episode, by the way.
Yeah, and that was sent by Medical Mechanica.
This time, she explicitly pulls this like flying V guitar out of Naota's head.
I mean, that was a super cool moment.
But with blood this time.
Yeah.
Like for the first time, something's popping out of his head bloody, and like she's like reaching in and pulling out this flying V, and she's like basically saying, okay, cool, you have to baseball swing this bomb back into space. The baseball bit opened with like talking about how Naota's the type of guy who doesn't take a swing. You could argue that it's like a fear of action / like learning how to take action and like all of that. That's how episode 4 goes. It's a wild one. And this is the first time that you like contextualize pretty much anybody's motives.
And then that bomb just like as it's coming into the atmosphere, it like turns into a giant baseball mitt and then just throws this giant ball. And then as it hits Naota's guitar, he's like pushing it back, and then I think doesn't Haruko like come back and help him like knock it away once and for all?
He's gotten it to the point where it's not falling, but he can't push it back, and so she's like, and here we go. And you kind of get the feeling it's like she's like running away, like she's like, okay, cool, you do this now, and she's like driving away. And in the dub, she turns to the audience and goes, well, depending on what he does next, this might be it, folks. And so it is kind of like a testing him moment, I think. Yeah, so episode 4 is a wild ride. And it's pretty much all that there is to like when we learn characters. Oh, there's a little light that tells me when I'm peaking. Oh!
Yeah, you just figured that out.
I don't...
I'm just kidding.
Yeah, so episode 5 is weird, and I don't like it.
I mean, I feel like we've literally started every single episode with, this episode is weird. That's this whole show.
5's especially weird, though. Episode 5, so every time that Amuro is talking to Naota in episode 4, he's like, hey, she's messing with you. She's using you. She's getting under your skin. Like, you are a tool to her. And we kind of get, like, a hint of, like, Naota, like, being resentful and, like, trying to buck that. And then episode 5 opens with Naota and Haruko with Uzis in the grass. And then they're watching a movie and everybody's chill together. And, like, Dad, Haruko, Grandpa, Naoto's watching a movie. The way that they talk about it in the dub, I think it's like a joke about John Woo movies, because they're like talking about like a bunch of like doves. Like, how did they get so many doves in that guy? Like a bunch of like, I think it's a John Woo movie joke. Yeah, they're just all friends now. And then there's a bit where after watching the movie, Haruko's hanging out in their bedroom with just a bathrobe on. We see her full ass randomly. In the English, he tells her to put some clothes on. So in both, she dresses up like an Elvis Presley type character. But in the English, she starts referencing like a bunch of pop and like rock groups, and about how if he lets her teach him guitar, he'll get all the girls. There are some like Smashing Pumpkins, Rage Against the Machines type references. And then out of left field, I think, because I have never met another person who knew about this band. The English references Richard Cheese, which is a lounge act.
Oh, I know who that is.
It is a Vegas lounge act that does Vegas lounge covers of pop and rap songs.
Yeah.
They do a very good cover of My Neck. Look up Richard Cheese. Yes, it's a joke about dick cheese. I popped off so hard watching this as a person who was sober this time and being able to pick up on that. Oh, I loved that so much.
I literally watched this afternoon, and I can't even remember what the references were in the Japanese. Like, this is why I needed to watch this shit twice. But then they just start. Then
she just starts kissing him on the bed, and that's when Dad shows up. And Dad is like, I will challenge you for Haruko. And Haruko's like, yeah, sure, do it. I'm here for that. There's a comedy, open quotes, moment where Dad strips down and then jumps at Haruko. And she has this like punching glove on a spring pops out of ostensibly her vagina to just punch him in midair, and what
pure absurdity.
And then it cuts back to like the grass and the Uzis, and it's Haruko and Naota versus Dad and the friendly first robot. Dad's dressed like a Nazi, not in the way that like he's wearing an armband, but it doesn't like. He's dressed as a Nazi, full on Nazi swastika and everything. They don't explain it. I don't know why. It's much more uncomfortable in the year of our Lord 2022 than it was in the year 2000, because I'm assuming in 2000 the idea that there's a very strong and prevalent neo-Nazi culture was still kind of like a, no, surely nobody's that stupid.
Yeah.
But now it's...
Well, this whole episode is just full of really random references to other media, like more so than the other. This is where the
7 of 9 joke happens.
Yeah. Well, and then this is also the episode where there's like a whole South Park animation sequence, which was just 100% out of the blue. And then it ends with like this reference to, I just learned about this today, there's an opening called Daikon 4 that was actually done in like the very early 80s. I think it was like 81. And it was actually done by animators who went on to form Studio Gainax that animated this show. And so there's this whole sequence where Haruko is like in a bunny suit and she's like flying. She's like riding her guitar through the air. And in this original opening, there's a girl in a bunny suit riding a sword through the air. Like the whole thing is just like one big reference.
The robot for this episode... or the evil robot for this episode is this like gunslinger cowboy robot that's like 3 buildings tall. What's really cool is over the course of the fight, Haruko will like be in a position where she's safe from both of his hands, and then like a hand will a hand will come out of like his trench coat with a gun, and we find out over the course of the fight that it is one giant hand. And all of its limbs are fingers that end in guns. And it's very over the top, but it's very cool design. Yeah, it's a very cool visual spectacle. This episode's much more directly focused on like Naota's dealing with being jealous. This is really where we find out that like he hasn't been paying Mamimi attention, but he doesn't like the idea of not having both Mamimi and Haruko interested in him. Like over the course of the show, like he's been spending most of his attention on Haruko to like the detriment of his relationship with Mamimi. And now that Haruko's like done all of the weird stuff with his dad, he's like, maybe it was in the last episode, but like between the last episode and this episode, like he's like, no, Mamimi, I love you. Like, nah, this is it type thing. And like, it really is a good example of just like, he's a jealous little kid who liked having pretty girls be interested in him, and he's like starting to like subconsciously, if not overtly, realize that they're not interested in him, and he doesn't know how to deal with that. Yeah, the big visual spectacle fight ends with pulling a 1961 Gibson out of Nauta. They specifically name the brand, name the model.
Well, no, isn't that when he's inside of the robot? Like the TV robot?
So it gets pulled out of the robot's TV head after he begins.
But then this is when we get introduced to the concept of this being called Amarisk.
I feel like we already knew about him. I feel like
I thought this was literally the first time he gets mentioned.
By this point, Amaro is like, she's here because of this space pirate.
Oh, I thought that this was the episode where we learned that. I might be wrong, but I don't remember.
We learned literally everything in the last 50 minutes of this show, which is the last 2.5 episodes. So, like, it could be, but like...
Yeah, what's his name? Adamisk?
Adamus, Abaticus, like... I was listening to the dub, and it's a little inconsistent and a little hard.
But he's this being called the Pirate King that the Medical Mechanica had captured, and that's like the whole reason Haruko is here. She wants to release him. We already kind of briefly touched on it. But this is when we learn that he wields a Gibson 1961, and it's a dope guitar. This whole fight is pretty dope.
It's very fun. The last episode happened. Atomsk. 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 Atomasuku, also known as the Pirate King, due to his N.O. channel, enabling him to steal entire star systems. It's an enigmatic energy being in the form of a phoenix-like creature with a nose ring. Episode 6 happens. It opens up with the homeroom teacher for Nauta and his classmates playing around with chopsticks. And it's like, hey, let's have a chopstick lunch. And in the dub, we learn a little bit about how apparently chopsticks can help fend off Alzheimer's, because you do have like so much more like engagement while you're eating.
Yeah, they do that in the sub too.
I definitely just like made the chopstick motion at Forrest. Which does not translate to a visual medium.
But doesn't the teacher just like hardcore like struggle to use them properly?
Yes, the teacher's bad at it.
Which is just super funny. I don't know. I honestly loved the teacher. She was just a really funny character, even though she was only around every once in a while.
Yeah, she had like 4 scenes. We get like glimpses of Nauta being withdrawn from everyone at this point.
Well, because after the last fight, Haruko just kind of disappeared, and he didn't know why.
We don't know that until later in the episode, so we just sort of like see Nauta being withdrawn. Amaro is just like in this construction site pipe in his on his Vespa. Is like, hey, yeah, this is what she does, by the way. She comes in, she ruins your life, and then she leaves. And then during that conversation, he teleports to a different pipe, but it's also still on his Vespa, and I'm like, oh, what's happening? But that was just probably a me thing. Oh, okay. So I don't know if this is in the sub, but there's actually a very powerful comedy moment here where they straight up go, hey, why did we cut to they cut to like the animated manga thing, and they're like, hey, they told us not to do that after the first episode.
Yeah, that's in the sub, and that was a really funny moment. It was just a nice little fourth wall break. They were like, we don't have the money, and this also just requires so much more time and effort to like draw out all these pages, so let's just not do that.
Yeah. We get like the second time in the series like jokes / like a serious conversation about like what does Fooly Cooly mean, and like in context it seems like Dad is saying it as like an onomatopoeia of like hanky panky, a little bit of smooshy smooshy, a little bit of rubby dubby,
but it literally means nothing. And even the Wikipedia page says it means nothing.
I love you powering through my noises. Haruko shows up at dinner like nothing happened, and Nauta like falls into her crying, asking where she went. By this point, Mamimi has pretty much full disassociated, because Nauta has just left her life, and she doesn't have a coping mechanism anymore. She finds this tiny little robot that is the core of the last robot that was fought, and she feeds it her cell phone. It gets a little bit bigger. And Naota, so Haruko offers Naota to leave town with her, and he does. They just sort of run around doing some vagabond shit. We get some grand ambition / plot about how medical machina is like flattening the galaxy, and this is after Amuro like offhandedly mentioned that like the folds is where like the wrinkles are where our thoughts are, and maybe wrinkles in the context of the show might be like the wrinkles and like folding in on our like the emotional conflict, but that seems like a wider stretch than most of the other imagery in this show. But
that doesn't seem too far off.
Medical machina is smoothing.
It's Mechanica. Just kidding.
Deus Ex Machina is smoothing the galaxy. Haruko brings Naota back because she needs him to get access to the Pirate King. So Naota pilots the thing, like the robot, and sort of like becomes one in this very strange visual, like merging with things. And then rather than like the Phoenix, like Pirate King emerging for like Haruko to like consume and like gain his power, it actually merges with Naota. And so Naota's like this Super Saiyan Red style like energy being, and there's a really sick battle between him and Haruko. He starts off dual wielding two of the guitar, like the two guitars that we saw him dealing with earlier, and then over the course of the fight they merge into one dual neck guitar.
Yeah, it was pretty hype. It was a super good fight.
At the end, Naota tells Haruko that he loves her. He goes to kiss her, and the pirate boy Phoenix spirit leaves, and then Haruko leaves to go chase after it into space.
And Mamimi witnessed this whole thing because she fed the core to this other robot, which then kind of leads to this whole conflict. But then kind of the final thing she does is she like snaps a picture of Naota like picking up Haruko's guitar, because Haruko like left her guitar behind and took the double neck guitar.
It's her bass.
Her bass.
She's a bass playing girl, and you can't be a manic pixie dream girl
without a bass.
Play a traditional melodic instrument.
Okay, I didn't know that.
If you look at the
news to me.
And that's the series. We get a little bit of like an end credit scene, basically, where Naota's moved on to his first year of high school, I guess. Like him and his friends that we've seen earlier, like they're now in school uniforms, which I think implies that they're in high school now. Like
yeah, I believe so.
He talks about how Haruko's just gone now, and about how Mamimi finally dropped out of school because she'd been playing hooky most of this time. She dropped out of school and then left town to like become a photographer, which is nice to give. Like she finally gets something. She gets to find value in herself, but what sucks is that we don't see it happen. We're told that it happens, or at the very least we're told that she goes off to find it. She deserved better. Yeah, and like Naoto's just sort of moving forward.
Yeah, we got what we needed to with her, because I mean
it's not her story, but I would have liked to have seen it more.
Her taking that picture of Naota there at the end, we like see that it was in the newspaper, and I think that like, I mean, obviously there's so much in this show that you kind of just have to like insinuate, and there's so much subtext because it's just so dense. But then at the end here, Naota kind of has that line where he's like, yeah, nothing ever really happens in this town. And that's kind of like where it ends.
Yeah, he hits us with the nothing changes here. And it's like, hang on a second. But yeah, like the show stands on its own and as like a 6-episode story. And like part of why everything that's so goddamn random about it works is that the point is how characters deal with chaos and with change. And like a lot of it isn't done for purpose. It's done for like comedy. But And so like in those regards, I think it falls flat. But the general like subtext and like imagery of the show really works. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, I had a pretty fantastic time watching it. I definitely want to watch it again.
I can't imagine seasons 2 and 3 are any good. They came out years later, and they couldn't not be anything but a cash grab tie-in.
Yeah, it definitely felt weird that they even exist. Do you have any final thoughts on the show? Or were those them?
Yeah, I think those were them. Like, oh, what it does well, it does well. I personally would have liked to have seen more visual construction in the way of that one scene that I stopped to talk about with like his dad's head and like the hard cuts and like the more real and like the smashing the television versus smashing his dad versus like those montages especially are so, or not montages, those sequences of images are so well done, and it's so delightfully constructed to really make you stop and question what you're being presented, and that's the type of shit I do like.
Yeah.
And I feel like it like underscores the fact that it was used sparingly is a very powerful tool to like really underscore like this is the culmination of like everything that's happened to this point, and like this is like where we really like learn the truth about Haruko's goals. But I would have liked to see it more. There's something to be said for the fact that it only happened those like 2 times, gives those 2 times more power, but I would have liked to see more of that and less of like the lol random humor, you know?
Mm-hmm. That's totally fair.
You have any last thoughts?
Honestly, I just don't know when I'm going to watch it again, but I definitely just need to watch it again because there were so many things that just went over my head. You definitely helped me like think about a lot of things that I definitely was not contemplating.
Well, I'm glad. That means hopefully one of you out there might have learned something or thought of something. I'm not going to say that you did for a fact because that feels egotistical. The nice part about not knowing when you're going to rewatch it is start to finish. If you skip the outros, it's like 2 hours.
Yeah, you could just watch it in one day.
Down, it's a movie.
This podcast episode will almost be as long as the series.
I'm surprised that we got that much out of it, considering how little actual video. Like, it's a lot of conversation, but like by terms of raw like content that we consumed, it's the shortest by a large margin.
Oh, it is, but there's also so much there. Like, it's so dense from an artistic standpoint. Like, yeah, I think there's so many things you could just continuously talk about.
Yeah, to be sure.
Which is why I think it holds up and why a lot of people kind of view it as this like pinnacle of animation.
The animation itself, again, very good. The only parts of the animation that doesn't hold up don't even not hold up from an objective standpoint. It's just subjectively, I didn't like some of the stylistic choices. It's not even like an, ooh, that's drawn ugly. It's like, I don't like how that looks, right? Like, yeah, like visually, it's still gorgeous when it wants to be. So, Forrest, I don't use social media because I'm bad at it, nor do I have anything to plug that would necessitate me to have social media. You, however, have both social media and things to plug.
Yeah, but I am very bad at social media, even though I do have it. But yeah, I make music. I go under the project name Bustello, Bustello. You can find me on YouTube. You can find me on Bandcamp or Spotify. I actually am finishing up a website finally after all this time. Wow. So by the time anyone ever hears this, that website will be up and running.
And regardless of how you actually made it, if we get an ad deal, it was definitely made by Squarespace. However,
it was actually on Squarespace, or is on Squarespace.
Shh, wait for the ad.
And then I also have a project called Prism Ship, where I do more dancey music. But anyway, Thank you for listening.
Goodbye.